As mentioned in Part 1 of the Pulps to Comics Precursor episode, the golden age of comic creators read their own entertainment when they were younger, and a lot of that was found in early pulp magazines and newspaper comic strips. In this video, we'll discuss more important pulp precursors to comics from the golden age, and we'll also additionally discuss pulps that some comic book artists worked on before they worked in comic books. Possibly the most important pulp precursor materializing into comic book form are those by the founder of DC Comics, formerly called National Allied Publications, the Major Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson, who is credited as the first owner and publisher to publish comic books with new material instead of just reprinting old newspaper strips. What makes this important is that he was a pulp writer and creator himself before establishing the commercial and pop cultural phenomenon of creating new comic books with new material in New Fun Comics. He asked the all-important question, why can't we put new material into comic book form? Why can't we create something new and put it into this format? This format doesn't have to be devoted only to the comic strips from the newspapers. A lot of this comic book hubbub now, with new materials, new graphic novels, new creativity, has a lot to thank to the Major. And that all started with his love for creating the pulp fiction that he previously worked on. Next, we have Hugo Gernsback, the editor of Amazing Stories and Science Wonder Stories, who wrote about the untapped power of cosmic rays in 1929. Cosmic rays were used to transform the Fantastic Four in their first issue, 1961, by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. Also, we have Satan Hall, the anti-hero detective, appeared in Detective Fiction Weekly. This issue shown is from 1932. As you can see, he has dark hair with the pointy ears, stark eyebrows, and the widow's peak, which bears a striking resemblance to Namor the Submariner by Bill Everett in Marvel Comics 1, 1939. Oddly enough, this same look also made it into Spock in the late 60s. In 1951, Bill Finger writes The Man Behind the Red Hood, the definitive origin story of the Joker being a small-time criminal, the Red Hood, who escapes Batman by falling into a vat of chemicals. This accident results in him looking like a disfigured clown. However, Theodore Tinsley wrote a shadow story called The Grim Joker in 1936 about a clown mob boss. Coincidentally, Theodore Tinsley also wrote about the Scarlet Ace in a crime pulp in the early 1930s, which also has some similarity to the later Red Hood. As much as Conrad Veidt was an inspiration on Bill Finger and Jerry Robinson, so also does it appear was Theodore Tinsley, the pulp writer. Alton Facts was one of the early 20th century cartoonists illustrating pulps like Real Western, All-Stars, and Crack Detective starting in the late 1930s, newspaper strips, and comic books through Funnies Inc., Lev Gleason, and Quality Comics. In 1941, Astounding Science Fiction has illustrations by Jack Binder that show a sharply detailed and dramatic side to the artist that may not have been as evident when he cartooned the likes of 1946 Wow Comics' Mary Marvel, the original Miss Marvel. This shows that a lot of the Golden Age comic book artists were also before pulp artists as well. One fun one is the science fiction story Odd John from 1935. Odd John is about an odd superhuman who explores the concept of the Superman as a genetic next step in human evolution. Much like Professor X, who builds a haven for his fellow mutants, the main character John has telepathic powers and finds a colony of other superhumans whom he protects from humans with his psionic abilities. The telepath coins the term Homo Superior, much like Magneto does in the first issue of X-Men 1963 by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. Amazing Stories 1938 has a Joker-type villain in Song of Death by R. Fuqua, which is a precursor to the creation of the comic book Joker by Bill Finger, Jerry Robinson, and Bob Kane in Batman 1, 1940. In 1939, Batman Adventure in Detective Comics 27, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, Bill Finger and Bob Kane created Commissioner James Gordon and based him off of The Whisperer, Police Commissioner James Gordon from a Street and Smith pulp from 1936. Same outfit and everything. Many know Paul Reinman as the man who inked Jack Kirby on some of the early 1960s Marvel comics like Avengers 2, 1963 for example, but he also worked in the pulps. He was a talented pulp illustrator as shown here in Adventure magazine 1941. Mr. Mxyzptlk premiered in Superman 30 in 1944, created by Siegel and Schuster, and seems to have a pulp precursor in Sky Imp from Fantastic Adventures magazine 1943. Lou Morales illustrated this page on the left for Fantastic Science Fiction 1 1952, depicting the sci-fi hero battling artificial intelligence robots. Just as pulps in the 30s inspired comics from the 40s, it is possible that this pulp from the 50s inspired a comic in the 1960s. Russ Manning created Magnus-Robot Fighter, a sci-fi costumed hero in 1963 for Dell Comics, which also featured a very similar concept. Well, this is another episode of CBH. The important thing about understanding the pulp history of comic books is to better understand the creators of the original golden age of comics, as well as what plot or storylines were on the pulse of the readers back then, and also the important concept of comic book artists previously or concurrently working over at the pulps. Cheers.